Hello guys, let's go with the second part of the lesson of the week number 10. So we have been talking about the Victorian period. Um, let's say that we have already mentioned most of the general characteristics, right? Most of the, let's say, the themes that are normally developing here. I think that this period, uh, probably more notoriously than others, uh, has a lot of representation in different fields, right? Of course, if you take a look at architecture in Renaissance or medieval English or something like that, you're going to find it, and that's fine. And the same happens with the clothes, yes. But over here, I think that if you take a look on the internet, and that might be fine to do that exercise, to look for Victorian architecture or Victorian clothing, or some other somehow manifestations, you're going to find really, really notorious characteristics, right? If you take a look at Victorian movies or Victorian time TV series or something like that, you're going to find uh, something that really aesthetically and physically has a very clear pattern, right? I really encourage you to do that exercise with this, and for sure you're going to say, oh yeah, like this has this air, this little impression that comes to my mind and reminds me of a certain movie that I once watched, or reminds me of a certain TV series, and that is Victorian, right? Um, so here we're going to take a look at some of the most relevant works of the period in England over here. And here we have a whole list. There are many more, right? But here are some of the, let's say, most important ones. So let's take a look at probably the most important Victorian author, who is Charles Dickens, and who has a lot of these different novels or short tales, such as the David Copperfield or Oliver Twist or Great Expectations, right? So let's think about, for example, Oliver Twist, in which we have the story of Oliver, who is an orphan kid who doesn't have parents, of course, who's really, really poor, who has to suffer a lot of different things to somehow do questionable activities, such as being forced to be a thief, yes, by a person who had an organization of kids who steal from people, who had a lot of contact with different people, good people, bad people, excellent people, and that eventually ends up getting some money and let's say belonging to a family, right? And of course, this portrays a lot of different realities, such as child work, yes, in which infants are forced to work, sometimes legal work, sometimes illegal things, such as this, in which we see the industrial society, in which we see people who died, people who are cornered into extreme poverty, and all these different things, right? We have, for example, Great Expectation, that is the story of, surprise, another orphan, yes, who's Pip, who lives with his sister and who has a contact with somehow a person who is a criminal, right? That at the beginning forces him to help him, to give him food, to maintain the secrecy. But eventually, this orphan kid starts advancing in life, and also because of the unexpected help of this criminal that he initially helped. Starts advancing in society and having more fortune and more money, and eventually getting a family, not without before experiencing certain things about love and seeing how people are good and bad, etc. Right? So these are a really realistic, let's say, portrayal of society, of the problems, of course, with a lot of fictional elements, right? But it is mostly rooted in reality. It doesn't have an intention of being really fantastic or something like that, right? Let's take a look, for example, at The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson. You know, is this doctor who belongs to the higher classes, who's really intellectual, who's well-mannered, but who has this sort of obsession with the duality of a human being, and how we can be show certain faces before certain people and some other ones before other, how we behave differently. And he develops this formula that is science-based. I mean, he never gives a lot of details about that, but he is emphatic into saying that it's not like a magical thing or a supernatural thing, but it is science, and that divides his personality in two. One is, let's say, the good one or the good side, the light representation of goodness, that is Dr. Jekyll, and then we have this creature who is completely immoral, who just obeys to his instincts, which are all of them bad or traditionally evil, as we consider them, who beats up people, who, let's say, it's always being excessively, let's say, self-indulgent, and well, all these different things, right? So even though when there's this touch of fiction, because no such thing is possible in terms of scientific development, well, the themes are related to that, yes, and how even a person who belongs to the high society, well, has this terrible side, yes, that was necessary only to have this secret formula to find it over there. So you will see that this Dr. Jekyll is still pretty realistic in many ways, yes. Let's say that this transformation into this monster that will later be somehow an inspiration for characters such as the Hulk in the comic books, or many others that deals with transformations, right? Well, it's more of a critique of a way to mention that we as human beings have all these different things, no matter if we are on high society, right? Now we have this Jungle Book, right? That is an interesting thing because it's about an, you guess, orphan who is some sort of Tarzan, right? He's grew up in the jungle, and he has these animals who are always teaching him different lessons. Yes, he has Bagheera, the panther, and Baloo, the bear, who are the teachers, and they show him the law of the jungle, and they educate him, and they somehow give him moral lessons and behavior lessons, right? Even though he is completely outside of the society, no, he's an outsider. He's a human trying to live among wild animals. So he will never be as good enough, no, in hunting, in running, in surviving, in being menacing, and all these different things. So even though this is pretty fantastic, right? Because first of all, we have animals who are natural enemies somehow sharing certain things, and of course talking animals, and a human that is able to understand them, etc. This works more in an allegoric way, yes. So you see how Baloo and Bagheera, they can be parents, but at the same time they can be teachers, and how they have different approaches, as Baloo, for example, may be really violent sometimes to teach his lessons and hits the kid, but this eventually is going to help him to understand certain things about the laws of the jungle, how he is initially also part of a pack of wolves. Yes, how the elder wolves start like losing their power because the young somehow are trying to overthrow them. We have an enemy such as Trekan, that is the tiger, that it's again also sort of an antagonist in there. We have the snake, that is Ka, I think it's called, if I recall correctly, and how we have these people who are deceiving, who are not completely trustworthy. A really interesting case is King Louis, right? Which is a monkey who has like an entourage of other monkeys who are like his servants, and who is completely crazy and mad, and somehow takes advantage of other animals, and he takes what he wants and actually doesn't work hard, but he just enjoys being lazy. And it's interesting that he is the closest, let's say, representation of men after Mowgli, who is the protagonist, the kid that I mentioned at the beginning. And even at some point, Mowgli feels related or identified with some of the behaviors of the king, right? But then he realized that it's not really like the best way. Again, a criticism to the monarchy, criticism to royalty, to abusive people, to people who really do not work very much and gets all the credit, and stuff like that, right? We have here something really interesting that I would say that is at the level of Dr. Jekyll and Hyde, but it's even more, no? Like a higher level of symbolism or representation, that is Alice in Wonderland, right? So we have, first of all, these two characters who are female, yes, so the most important ones are in there and are female. Sure, we have a lot of male characters in there, but they are not so relevant, or even if when they're relevant, they are not so strong, yes. And sometimes they're not even human, right? We have this representation of the Queen of Hearts, that, remember, that is authoritarian, that it's always trying to show that she's powerful, that is always trying to mention that she's the one in charge, yes. And she always says, off with their heads, to the minimum, and in face of the minimum problem or the minimum lack of respect, or the most simplistic, let's say, offense, she's always like saying, cut off his head or her head. Many people have said that this is a representation of Victoria, yes. That it's always like trying also to portray herself as a really strong woman, as a very strict one, overcompensating, overreacting, making very harsh decisions, and with a husband, because remember that we have also the king over there, that is not very visible. Yes, you see, sure, there is a king of hearts, but he is like a puppet somehow. He doesn't really have a lot of authority. He sometimes, sure, like make his title valid, but the protagonist in our moment is this character of, let's say, the Queen of Hearts. So here we have a lot of different things. As I mentioned, let's say the criticisms to the monarchy and showing them as really sadistic and abusive and all these different things. We also have, for example, the role of teacher one more time. We have the Cheshire Cat, who appears to Alice now and then in order to give some guidance. But this guidance is no longer specific. Yes, if you take a look at the Cheshire Cat, he's always speaking in riddles and asking questions rather than giving direct answers, and letting Alice learn their lessons because of her experience. He doesn't really like say, hey, you have to do this, and this. So it is a little bit more of a guide than a traditional perception of teacher back then, that was an eminence and someone really wise or something like that, right? In this way, we'll see consistency, for example, between the roles of teacher of the Cheshire Cat in Alice in Wonderland and, for example, Baloo in the Jungle Book. They are both teachers in their ways. Also, although Baloo is a little bit more paternalist, he is also like trying to make a lesson out of every experience that this guy of Mowgli is having. Okay. Well, finally, I would like to mention something really short about the realistic period in America. So this is how it was called or how it was interpreted in America. So remember that we're talking about the same period. Once happened in England, the other one happened in the territory known as the United States nowadays. And even though they have different names, the implications are more or less the same, right? Let's say that here in this realistic period, if you go to slide 131, you're going to see that it had a lot of propaganda somehow implications, right? Remember that also in some of the previous periods, while in England something was happening, they were in their independence war in the past. So here, let's say that we are trying to consolidate this independence, trying to again continue on this struggle for equal rights, for the value of humans, no matter their race, etc. Right? And of course, let's say that they have a lot of different things over here that accentuated this and that make it more important, such as the slavery process or slavery period in which, people from the United States use and continued using or continued abusing, I would say, of people for doing their tasks, for the harvest, for the house service, etc., under this figure of slavery, right? You probably will remember that at some point there was this revolt in which everything that was arriving from other places, specifically from France, yes, demanded equality and brotherhood, etc. So there was a section of the population that promoted the abolishment of slavery, right? Treating the slaves as normal people, real people, people who have the rights, and then some others who were against that. And that was really, let's say, understandable in terms of, let's going to call it logical, with this terrible logic of neoclassic. That it was logical because it was their means of production, right? So they felt that they were like robbing them from their instruments, right? Let's say I spent I don't know how many years like breeding these people for serving me as my tools, and now you want to free them? What is that? I don't want that. And that was basically the civil war among different things. No, the fact that the states, mostly the states of the north, were against slavery, and mostly the states of the south they were in favor of it, and there was this war. So in terms of literature, again, we have this interest for the ordinary, for the commonplace, for things that happened every day. A depiction again of the common life, right? Of course, this was still more rural, no, a little bit more rural, and that is why, let's say, if you go into the final slide for this period, I mean 133, you will find a tendency towards naturalism or hyperrealism, right? So somehow they were always like celebrating nature, celebrating the rural spaces, somehow recognizing the contribution of the simple people, let's say sometimes farmers, sometimes the rural life in general, and this is what, let's say, was maybe the main difference over here, that this naturalism or hyperrealism, or this realism, this depiction of life as it is, of as it was, was more based on let's say rural areas more than the ones that were, let's say, more urban, right? So from here we have some, for example, a very important piece of work, literary piece, that is The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, or The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, by Mark Twain, in which we see the importance of, let's say, freedom. Yes, the protagonists of this book are a kid who is Huckleberry Finn, talking about Huckleberry Finn, who is sort of an orphan as well. Well, he has a father, but the father is an alcoholic and never had like a good relationship with him, and well, he eventually wants to escape from all these canons of society, such as school, such as dressing properly. So even though when he was adopted by a widow to give him a better life, well, he was tired of that and he decided to escape. And that is when he found also a slave who was escaped, and they went through the Mississippi, like somehow escaping and trying to find freedom, and in the course of this trip, finding good people, bad people, and criticisms to, again, monarchy, lack of democracy, people who think that because they are rich they are better, well, etc. Right? So basically that is what we have, guys, in general terms about this Victorian period, or a realistic period in America. It's more or less the same, and that's it. Okay, so we have one assignment for this week that is divided into parts. First of all, take a look at the poem that I mentioned at the beginning that I read. So you're going to listen to it again, verify it. If you want to look for them and read it complete, well, that's fine. It's easy to find. But that's up to you. I'm going to be focused specifically in the parts that I read. And you are going to classify it in one of the periods, right? One more time, this may be in a specific period, or this may be, if you look online, and probably it says that it belongs to another that we have not studied, an idea. But the important thing here is to classify it into one of these as best as it's fit. I think that we have already somehow clarified that it's very hard that it's going to to fit perfectly, but you are going to find some reasons for it. Okay, so as usual, try to give 3 reasons to classify it in one specific period of the ones that we have already mentioned. Some people, for example, in the past have given like characteristics of 2 periods. Well, that's also a possibility, but try to select one. Okay, so give me 2 reasons for it. Now, that is the first part. For the second part, we're going to the slide 130. And remember that I mentioned, or that I explained some different things about, for example, Charles Dickens, or Lewis Carroll, or Rudyard Kipling with the Jungle Book, etc. Okay, so you're going to select one of those, yes, one of the other ones that are there that I have not explained, yes, one of the ones that I have not mentioned, and you are going to research a little bit about it. Probably you're going to read a short summary of what is the story about, and you're going to tell me why is this located in the Victorian period. Also, 3 reasons. Okay, so this is a matter of researching, of trying to get to know what is the story about, if there's any symbolism or something like that, and you're going to try to tell me why. Okay, basically that's it. You're going to work as usual in your groups of 4, or 3, 2, or 1, as you prefer, and those, or that is the assignment divided into parts for this group. Okay, thank you very much. Have a great rest of the day. See you around. Bye bye. Hugs.